There's a driving band here on this projectile right there at the top of my brass, and if I were to seat this any deeper into the brass, the ogive, or the curve of the bullet, would be seated into the neck. Thus our neck is not gripping the bullet on that portion of the ogive that is in the case. Alrighty folks, welcome back. We're just out here finishing up some work on these 243 cast lead loads here. We've got the RCBS 24495, and we're just touching that up with a very slight crimp from the Lee factory crimp die. Ooh dang, don't that purty? And I've got this basically set to do the most minimum amount of crimping. That allows this to fully chamber in our case gauge there. And you can see our charge there with some red dot. Pretty much going from the starting charge up to barely over the maximum from the old Lyman cast loading manual. I really enjoy the third edition. Third edition is awesome. The fourth one they've had out for like a decade, but it hasn't been updated at all in a long time, so it's about as useful as the much older third edition. It actually has more variety of powder selection, in my opinion. So yeah, these are looking freaking awesome, and they just slide right in and out with no issue at all. And now you saw it stick a little bit right there, and that's because our bullet is 1/1000th over the standard diameter for your 243. And we could remedy this by turning our necks, and what that does is reduces the amount of material either on the inside or the outside diameter, or depending on your fancy tool you can cut away from both sides at once if you're moving that much material. Generally though, when you're turning your necks, you just have a little cutter here on the outside, and that will uniform the thickness of your case walls all the way around your neck. And that's especially useful when reforming your 243 out of, say, 308, or doing any kind of case forming that wasn't from the original case. Now, these are actually 243 head stamps, but I've got this Peterson 308 that I reformed to 243, and I bet we could turn these necks and make them a little more uniform, because they're probably a little thicker than they would be if it was a 243 case. This is the same if you're making like blackout out of 223. Your new neck is way down here where your case walls are way thicker. Does that make any sense? If your new neck is here, it's going to be thicker. Your bullet diameter plus your new thick neck, that's going to be too wide to fit into your chamber, so you have to turn that down to the proper diameter, because math and reasons and specs, you know, staying within specification is important. But speaking of specifications, you see how long these cases are right here? Our maximum overall length, when I put this in the maximum overall length gauge, the little Hornady tool, and then you put it in your chamber and you push it out till it hits your rifling, and then you lock it, and then you can take a measurement of that. I'm about 1/1000th under that measurement, so when I did that, it came out to 2.510. So I'm seating these to right about 2.508, 2.509, depending on, you know, the tip of the bullet and how the powder coating turned out and whatnot. But if you see, I can't actually seat it any shorter, because this driving band on the top of the bullet would be going into the brass, where the ogive of the bullet is now inside the brass too, and the extra brass from the top going over the ogive isn't actually holding on to our bullet. So I'm in a weird space with this project, because my maximum overall length is also my minimum overall length. But does that make sense? Let me try and show you more better. There's a driving band here on this projectile right there at the top of my brass, and if I were to seat this any deeper into the brass, the ogive, or the curve of the bullet, would be seated into the neck. Thus, our neck is not gripping the bullet on that portion of the ogive that is in the case. That can give you inconsistent neck tension and inconsistent ignition and all kinds of weird things, especially when you go to do a crimp. If you go to crimp and it's trying to push the brass around the projectile, if that diameter it's pushing into is smaller, it's not going to be able to crimp. It's just going to kind of push the brass, and you'll still have negative space between your case wall and the curve of the bullet before it gets crimped into the curve of the bullet. So I think I came up with a way to remedy that. Since we can't seat our case any shorter without the brass coming up, what if we had shorter brass so we could move the brass and the bullet down further, right? Well, if we back up to the Peterson 308 brass, you know 308 has a maximum case length before you trim it of 2.015 inches, whereas a 243 case has a maximum case overall length before you trim it of 2.045. That is 30 thousandths of extra brass up here compared to the Peterson case that these are starting with, right? So what if I use this slightly shorter brass? That would give me 30 thousandths of room to move that bullet down, right? Is this true? You know, are you following? If my brass is slightly shorter, I can have that much more room to still meet up with the driving band, thus not seating over the ogive. And we could be able to, at that point, play with our overall length just a bit compared to either straight up jamming or not having our full contact with the neck. You know? Just random thoughts here as we're working through this project. You can see we've got these nice test loads of the red dot charges here. We have Winchester primers. These are Federal cases. And we're going to be getting out to the range here real soon. So let me know if you guys have ever seen that, where your max overall length is also your minimum overall length, unless you do some gymnastics with your brass length. Have you ran into that? Could be interesting. Especially if I didn't measure where this was hitting my rifling. The max overall length for a standard 243 projectile is 2.710. So if I actually seated the bullet out that far, I'd have been jamming it 0.2 of an inch, all the way from 2.7 down to 2.5. So that would be a lot of jam into your lands, right? At that point, it would just be like smashing the bullet and seating it and scraping across the crimp we put on it and all kinds of nonsense. So had I not gotten the overall length gauge, I would not be aware of this until I went to chamber one, and I'd be like, dang, I can't even turn the bolt at all. And then if I did, because I'm a dummy, I would just try to force it, like, oh, why didn't it work? And it would just jam in, and then I'd have a bullet stuck in my rifling. I'd have to jam that out with a cleaning rod or something annoying. So long story short, this is the first time I'm really super glad I got the overall length gauge, because I haven't used it for any real jacketed bullets yet. Anyway, stay tuned for more random ramblings at the reloading bench. Check out dummyroundreloading.com, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.